These are in listen-only mode.
Hello, this is Buddy Cressionnie. We'll go ahead and get started with the webinar in just a minute. Here are some tips that GoToWebinar has provided to us that I've had up here on the screen. They recommend you close as many applications in the background as possible to eliminate the time lag between slides. There's a question box. This presentation is posted in its entirety in the iaqg.org website. Also, it will be posted in the PJR website as well. There's be no training certificates for this webinar. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Good day. My name is Buddy Cressionnie. I am the America's leader for the 9100 standard. Something called a sector document representative, meaning that I'm responsible for the development, maintenance, clarifications associated with 9100. This is the second of two presentations that IAQG has developed and made available. Pleased to support Perry Johnson Registrars with this particular webinar. And this one is the clause by clause. To provide a little bit of background, in September of last year, the 9100 standard, and by the way, you'll hear me call it 9100. Of course, in the Americas, it's AS9100, Europe, EN, Asia Pacific, GISQ. It's all the same standard, published by IAQG. What we do is we develop our standards in English and then translate into different languages at the international level. So. The standard is based upon ISO 9001, which was published in September 2015. I mentioned that this is the second of two presentations. The first is a key changes presentation. We talk more at a high level. It's about a 1-hour webinar. And we talk about what are those key changes that go across the entire standard. This complements that one. It goes into discussion of each clause. Clause by clause, and digs into a little bit more details. As I mentioned, just to remind everybody that the standard is based upon ISO 9001, excellent foundation to a quality management system. About 1.5 million companies certified worldwide to ISO 9001. Aviation, space, and defense uses it, as well as other sectors like automotive, medical device, and so forth. They use ISO as the basis, and then they add on additional aviation, space, or defense, or their particular sector requirements. So we'll talk a little bit about ISO versus 9100. Of course, it's all, if it's a change to ISO 9000, it's a change to 9100 since we included it in its entirety. ISO 9001 has really not changed significantly since the year 2000. In 2009, it was amended to provide some clarifications, but was not even really even viewed as being a revision. And that you can definitely understand the fact that with it being out there for 15 years, it was time to make some changes to adapt to a changing world. Still, the focus is on satisfying customers. What you typically see out of ISO 9001 is a major change, then a minor change. Well, guess what? This is a major change, the 2015 version of ISO 9001. We're hoping it'll be fairly stable for another 15 years, so we won't see a major change in 8 years from now, 7 years from now. It provides that's what I mean about the consistent foundation for the future. Reflects the increasing complex environments in which organizations operate. Many more international partnerships, agreements, shared work arrangements than what was present back in the year 2000. Making sure that the standard reflects the needs of all interested parties, so kind of an expanded view of interested parties and the integration with other management systems. You'll hear me talk about Annex SL, also common management system structure. All management systems that ISO publishes will have the same structure. So if you want to adopt, in addition to your quality management system, environmental, safety and health, information technology, so forth. All those will have the same 10-clause structure that we're going to talk about today. 9100, of course, since it's based upon ISO 9001, when ISO changes, it needs to change as well to incorporate all those requirements. What we did is we actually tracked every single shall statement from 9100 2009 into the new standard and make sure that we agreed with making sure that there was coverage in the 2016 version of 9100. In some cases, there were some things that ISO removed that we added back in. So we tracked not only the additional aviation, space, and defense, but even the ISO 9001 requirements. We considered stakeholder inputs. We did a survey back in 2013 to ask people, how did we do on the standard? Did we meet all the design specification requirements? And then ask them for input on what they wanted to see in the next version of the standard. So we considered all those inputs. Also we did is we looked at the clarifications that have been provided to make sure that if there's a way we could word some things more clearly, we would go do that. So let's just go ahead and dig right into the clause-by-clause discussion. So if it's a change to ISO 9001, it's in a beige box, 9100, kind of on this light blue box. Also, there's several slides where there's more information on topics. Whenever there's an I with a circle around it, means there's additional information. So starting with the standard, it starts off with a forward, revision, summary, rationale, intended application. Pretty much the same information. Let me point, though, to intended application. What we did is we added intended application in the year 2009 because to make sure that people understood which of the series of standards was the most applicable to your business. And it really depends upon what's the focus of your product line, what your customers are requiring for your organization to go make the determination of which standard is the most applicable. We did include a note for the 2016 version of 9100 that if you have deliverable software, it is recommended to use 9115. That's the software standard that says, here's how to apply software to meet the 9100 requirements. Then it starts with the introduction, 0.1 general. It includes what does should, shall, should, must, and can mean. Some people say, what about must? Some of our FAA customers or some of our FAA, you're starting to have requirements with the word must. We consider must and shalls to be equivalent. Standard writers use the term shall. That starts with ISO, so that's what we use. Quality management principles. Of course, the standard was kind of based upon these principles in the year 2000. What's interesting is in order to go look at them, you had to go to ISO 9000 or 9004. They're now embedded as part of 9100. I'm sorry, ISO 9001 and 9100 for that matter. There were 8 principles that were identified in the year 2000. They were tweaked just a little bit, and there's 7 now. The systems approach was merged with the process approach. I would encourage you to go take a look at that. It's overall thinking with regards to how to go implement your quality management system. 0.3 process approach. The process approach was first introduced back in 2000. I will say that this version of the standard, the revision, even emphasizes that more. So if you're struggling with how to go do my interaction of processes, how to go do SIPOCs or turtle diagrams and so forth, that's an area for you to go strengthen with regard to your system because those are still very valid, if anything, embellished now requirements. Plan, do, check, act. Wonderful way of looking at your system. You could look at plan, do, check, and act from a very macro scale, all the way down to a very micro scale. If I'm going out to the factory floor, I typically, when I go do audits, I look to see how do we plan the activity for the factory floor, for example. What are you doing? Let me go see your work instructions and reference documents. How does that work get checked? And then how do you act upon those results? So plan, do, check, act can be viewed, once again, down to at any level of process auditing. So what they also did is ISO included more schematic representations of a process as well as the PDCA. Relationship with other management system standards, there is a table that's back in the annex that also talks to, here are the different ISO TC176 documents as well as IEQG documents. So if you want some additional assistance on what are some best practices with regard to my system, you can go adopt those. Then it starts with requirements, starts with scope, normative reference. Of course, the normative references being ISO 9000 for terminology, ISO 9001 because it's embedded within 9100. 3, terms and definitions, special requirements, critical items, key characteristics still there. We added definitions for counterfeit parts and product safety. I'll go through those definitions when we talk about those particular clauses. So then it starts with Section 4. Section 4 is the context of the organization. This is your, to go look at, here's how my system operates totally. And it starts with understanding the organization in its context. It talks about these external issues and internal issues. So let me help provide some clarity there. So it's really the environment in which your organization is operating. I think sometimes people call it environmental assessment, not environmental like environmental safety health, but just the business environment that you're operating. The external issues, like what are my legal, regulatory, statutory type requirements that I have within this industry? Technological, is there some kind of state-of-the-art information I need to be aware of to be successful? Competitive, is it a saturated market or opportunities? Cultural, social, and economic environments. So those are all things that you consider as part of this context of the organization. Internal issues. Now that I understand the external environment I'm operating to, how does that match up with my own organization's skills, my values, my culture, my knowledge, the resources that I have? Do I have the right equipment, the right infrastructure, the right building even, facilities, performance? Do I have performance that meets customer expectations to be in this particular business? So I know that many companies that are currently certified will be like, yeah, we do that. We've been in business, 20 years. I would really encourage you to take a fresh look at this. Many of these areas is not new if you have a robust strategic planning activity with regard to your system. But please don't shortcut this. So in the past, we've always talked about stakeholders, and the main stakeholder being our customer. Now the standard talks about interested parties, about what are relevant interested parties and their requirements. And we have a chart coming up on this, and we'll talk some more about that. Determining the scope of the quality management system. What's the scope and justifications where a requirement cannot be applied? We used to call this exclusions, kind of the negative. Now we talk about application or applying the requirements. Quality management system and its processes. The standard since the year 2000 has always provided some flexibility for documentation and records to the extent necessary for your quality management system. Now, I know that many of you are aware that ISO 9001 has removed the requirement for a quality manual and the 6 documented procedures. What we have done for 9100 is we think that it's smart to capture the information here in section 4 and include that in the high-level documentation called maintain documented information. If you want to continue to call that a quality manual, that's great, no problem with that. If you have a contractual requirement for a quality manual, you'll absolutely need to go maintain that. So what we did is we looked at what the current requirements, or I should say the 2009 requirements were for a quality manual, and then we added things to it, things like who are your relevant interested parties, what is the scope of your system, and so forth. And so that's what the shaded blue area talks about, the additional 9100 requirement for that documented information to be maintained. So let's talk about interested parties. According to ISO 9000, stakeholder, person or organization that can affect, be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision or activity. Some examples, things like employees, management, organization, owners, unions, suppliers, customers, partners, regulatory authorities, certification organization. So once again, the most important interested party is our customer, but by no means is that the only interested party. When developing and executing my quality management system, hopefully you're doing that with employees in mind as well. You're doing that with regards to regulatory authorities and making sure you're understanding regulatory requirements and changes to those requirements. You're updating your system according to your suppliers and making sure that you're providing good, clear direction so you get conforming hardware, conforming parts. So there's really a couple of different ways. The way you need to be looking at the interested parties is, first of all, looking at who are all my interested parties, kind of going back to this definition of stakeholder or person or organization that can affect or be affected by or perceive itself be affected by a decision or activity. So that's first. Who are all this big group of interested parties? Second, relevancy. Whenever the standard talks about interested parties, they talk about relevant interested parties. So how are those groups relevant to your quality management system? And it may be decided that some of those interested parties are not relevant. But when I'm talking about relevance, throughout the standard we talk about getting interested parties involved in activities and decisions. So for example, when we talk design and development, it asks you to consider inputs from interested parties. Obviously, you wouldn't use all the people in this whole list when looking for design inputs from interested parties. Okay? So you as an organization first get to pick who are relevant interested parties and how they're relevant. The scope of the quality management system. As I mentioned, the standard no longer refers to exclusions. It talks about applicability. So it needs to be applicable depending upon the size or complexity of the organization, the management model, the range of your activities, and the nature of risk and opportunities. You can decide that a requirement is not applicable, but only if the decision will not result in failure to achieve conformity of products and services, enhancement of customer satisfaction. So if there is a particular requirement within the standard and it applies, you can't take an exclusion. It has to be only when it doesn't affect your system. So as an example, if you have, let's say you don't do any special processes within your particular quality management, within your organization, but you outsource it. Well, still, you're responsible for everything that's part of your process. So you can't take in exclusions for special processes because it is something you do, and you do it as an outsource to a supplier. Any time you take an exclusion, it has to be justified for non-applicability. If you're a manufacturing organization in aviation, space, and defense, we would think that non-applicability outside of Clause 8 would be unusual. Not to say it can't happen. If I was a service organization, for example, and I had no calibrated equipment, I wasn't measuring anything. Let's say I was like a engineering services company, then I might want to exclude calibration, which is in Section 7. So that would be a valid explanation. And that's, by the way, talking about explanation, it can't just be, you know, I'm a build-to-print supplier. It needs to be something more along the lines of, I do not do design and development. I get design prints for my customer, and I do not alter them. Okay, it needs to be an explanation of exactly why is it not applicable. The quality manual, or this information, as I mentioned, what we did is we included all the current requirements in 422, or 2009 version of 422, and then we added things like who are your interested parties, what's your scope, what's your process description, your sequence and interaction, responsibilities and authorities. One of the things that ISO did and 9100 include as well is giving you additional flexibility of how you document some of this information. It's in documented information. It can be document, it can be web pages, it can be electronic, it can be wikis. It's giving you some flexibility for this information. There's a note in there talking about this information should really be in a single source. Some people had a real heartburn with manuals being considered low-level documentation. Typically, this information is very high level because you're describing your whole system. So, next chapter or next clause section is leadership. Starting off with 5.1, leadership and commitment. Remember, we used to talk about management responsibilities here. Now it's more on leadership. One of the changes to ISO is that we make sure that the quality management system is integrated into the business process, where before it was kind of implicit. Now it's very explicit. You know, we need to make sure that the way we're operating our system, quality management system is done one way, and the way we operate the business is different. The policy is required to be aligned with the organization's strategic direction. So once again, here's my strategic direction, short-term, long-term, short-term. My policy should be aligned to that to say, here's where we want to be, kind of from a mission statement perspective to go realize that strategic direction, and then I have my objectives as being part of the near-term actions I'm taking to go realize the overall policy and the strategic direction of the organization. Organizational roles, responsibilities, authorities. ISO removed the requirement for a management representative. Part of the ISO thinking was that they took the requirements from the management representative, and what they did is they moved it to top management's responsibility. The 9100 team agreed with the thinking, basically being they want top management involved in this system. You know, what 9100 and IEQG did is we actually put a requirement in there to interview the top leader of the organization. So once again, focusing on the fact this is not just a quality activity. But ISO wanted to make sure that it was not viewed that, hey, top management is just delegating this all to some person in quality, that top management has a responsibility, so they got rid of it. Now, top management within that ISO context can still delegate those responsibilities to different people on the staff. And that's where the rub started, is that it's possible to delegate that to different people, so you no longer have a single person that has responsibility and accountability for the quality management system. So 9100 added back in the requirement for a management representative. Section 6, planning. It starts off with actions to address risk and opportunities. Probably one of the more major changes of the standard. You've probably heard risk-based thinking. And what risk-based thinking consists of is the introduction of risk and opportunities here up front in the planning, and then also risk references throughout the entire standard. So when people tell me that preventive action was taken out of the standard, I really have heartburn with that, because if anything, it's been embellished. Before, we had preventive action as the very last clause of the standard, with some steps that really weren't intuitive to how preventive action is accomplished. Now what we have is to think proactively to prevent issues by risk and opportunities, introduced here at in the planning section at the very beginning. It goes across the entire quality management system, and there's references throughout the whole 9100 on risk and opportunities. Once again, determine what those risks and opportunities are, and then plan the appropriate actions to reduce those undesirable effects. 6.2, quality objectives. There's more prescriptiveness with regard to objective, including the evaluation of the results. So if you look at 6.2, you'll see that it requires you to identify things like who's going to be responsible for that objective, what resources are required, what's the time frame, what's the desired output, and how are you going to verify to make sure you're meeting those results. All right, so much more details than what was in the standard in the past. Planning of changes. We're talking here about overall high-level quality management system changes, not little bitty things within the noise. But we need to talk about what are the changes, making sure they're properly planned. This is also a requirement to talk about QMS changes as part of your management review. Section 7, support, starts with resources. And you see there we have people, infrastructure, environment for the operation of processes, which is basically your work environment clause, monitoring and measuring resources, which your calibration clause. So glad that it was taken out of our product life cycle section and put here as a supporting process, and knowledge, organizational knowledge. So let me talk about this a little bit. First, with regards to the infrastructure aspect, the infrastructure can include different aspects of your quality management system with regards to supporting aspects of the standard. Environment for the operation of processes, like I said, formerly called work environment. It includes human and physical factors. This is also kind of tied into the whole notion of human factors that is referenced within the standard. Some people have gotten pretty worked up with regards to a note and examples within a note. Once again, notes are for guidance, not auditable. But what you want here within the work environment, and it only makes sense, is that it considers human and physical factors such that I have an environment where I can get conforming products on time to my customers. Also, I want an environment that's not endangering people. Of course, that's kind of getting into more of an OSHA perspective, but where people, you know, it's not painful to go to work every day, where I have a lot of turnover. So does that mean that, for example, I am now required to go provide a cushy work life for all my employees, you know, provide recliners, have a safe space? No. There's a organization I audited, or I did an audit down in South Texas, and they have no air conditioning. I should have known that when I saw their work schedule, and they start work at 6 o'clock in the morning. That should be your first indicator that they may not have, you know, air conditioning. But if you look at it, you look at their customer satisfaction measures, you look at their quality, you look at their on-time delivery, it's outstanding. You look at the work profile, you see very little turnover of employees. You see some people who have been employees there for over 30 years. So once again, the environment is conducive to quality products and services. Okay? Organizational knowledge. We have an additional chart on organizational knowledge of gaining what are those things you need to go make sure that you have as part of your system so you have continuity of operations. 7.2, competence. Always find it interesting. Actually, I did a count last year where I looked at how many times is the word training mentioned in the standard. And what you'll notice is every time the standard gets revised, there's less and less reliance on training and more reliance upon competence. So training is a way to go ensure the competence. Of course, there's requirements to ensure that those people are tested and validated that they have necessary competence after the training. By the way, the other word I search for is the word quality. And what's interesting is every time the standard gets released, there's less and less references to the word quality. Of course, there's many of us believe that the word quality makes people believe this is just a quality organizational thing and not look at quality from a broader perspective. 7.3, new structure-wise called awareness. So we've had requirements in there for like awareness of the quality policy, how you contribute to objectives, awareness of procedure changes. We added a couple things to that, and there's an additional slide on it as well, but how employees contribute to product or service conformity, product safety, and the importance of ethical behavior. Communication. You have to remember that the common management system structure integrated common requirements from all management system structures. So ISO 9000 mainly thought of communication from an internal perspective, environmental from both an internal and external perspective. So ISO 9001 and therefore 9100 has now an external component of communications. If you look at the detailed requirements, it talks about the fact of who's going to communicate, how often are they going to communicate, what are they going to communicate, and so forth. Now, people could take this to a ridiculous level. This is talking about company-wide type communication. So, for example, we're going to have an all-hands pitch quarterly. We're going to have weekly staff meetings with notes coming down. These are the types of things you're talking about. You don't expect to see an employee going into their boss's office and say, wait a minute, this is not part of my communication plan, I can't talk to you. So we're talking about really the big communication activities, okay? 7.5, documented information. This is some new terminology, probably the most significant terminology, replacing documents and records with maintained and retained documented information. One of the things that ISO has done is ISO has removed the 6 mandatory procedures within the system. I will tell you that control of non-conforming material and corrective action has been added back in by Aviation, Space, and Defense. Besides, it's kind of interesting. I know a lot of people in industry are real concerned that companies will go transition to the new standard and there'll be a bonfire in the parking lot where they're going to burn all their procedures. But the standard has been flexible for years with regards to what kind of procedures were necessary. The organization gets to decide beyond the quality manual and those 6 documented procedures. So I don't know too many companies that just have a quality manual and 6 procedures. Organizations felt it was necessary to ensure consistency of operation as well as the maintenance of organizational knowledge to document things. So if they found a need for it, and I would encourage you, if you found a need, to please don't go start gutting your system. So 751, 752, 753 talks all about how you control, create, update documented information. We did add a requirement in 753. Part of this requirement was already in the standard for 9120 in the past, but data protection processes, how to make sure that we're backing up our information, how we make sure that we have protections in place such that we can't get hacked from the outside. What are those necessary protections? Organizational knowledge, a new clause of the standard, and I remember, when I was a young pup, some of the industry thinking was, knowledge is power. Don't share anything you know, because then it makes you more people you can then be easily replaced. So make sure you're the only one that knows how to do this. And that's an awful way to think about things from an organizational preservation, continuity perspective. What we want to do is we want to make sure we safeguard the organization from loss of knowledge. So as staff turns over, we're not, the whole place doesn't shut down because we don't know how to do that. And it's the failure to capture and share that information. So the organization needs to acquire it, preferably from their experts. Why would I want to acquire? Yep, here's the right way to go do it for my poor performing employees or the ones that generate a lot of nonconformities. But what are some things we need to go do to make sure that if there's some good practices, we're capturing those things and also sharing them with everybody. So implementation considerations, look at best lessons learned. Some organizations have lessons learned databases. That's great. I've seen that be wildly successful in the software world. The problem is outside the software world, I've seen organizations expend a lot of time and effort to develop lessons learned databases, and then they never go look at them. Once again, if you find that helpful or if you want to go develop one, by all means, please go do it. Identification of experts to transfer the knowledge, on-the-job training, tutorial sessions, your whole succession planning. From a lot of times we use succession planning for leadership. That's great. What's important about organizational knowledge is to understand that it doesn't need to be a one-size-fits-all. So if I want to use succession planning as part of how I do organizational knowledge sharing for my leadership, that's great. If I want to use lessons learned databases for my program management engineering activity, fine. If I want to use things like job capability matrix or skill matrices down the factory floor to make sure I'm not just one person deep, that's a good way to make sure, who has the expertise to go do these tasks. So it can be kind of a combination of things. Obviously, I imagine most organizations, when you have ways of doing things and you find out better ways to do things, you're documenting those as part of your procedures, your work instructions, your travelers, your program plans. So these are all ways you can assess for organizational knowledge. Awareness. As I mentioned, we added 3 new bullets to the awareness. It includes things, awareness, like I said, awareness of the policy, how I contribute to objectives, and so forth. Now we also have how employees contribute to product or service conformity, contribution to product safety, and the importance of ethical behaviors. So there's lots of ways you can go flow this information down to employees. You can communicate directly from leadership down to employees, communication campaigns, focal points, formal training. But what's expected is that just like I go to somebody and ask them about the quality policy, I don't want them to just go read something. I want them to be able to explain their role, how they contribute to the quality policy. The same thing is true with regards to these awareness activities. So I can go talk to employees, and it can be in, let's say I talk to an engineer about how do you contribute to product or service conformity, product safety, and they could talk to me about, you know, the manufacturability of the design, the fact that I need to make sure that I keep the right tolerances on things so the product goes together. What's the impact of, you know, if the things are not done properly? We could have manufacturing issues. We could have a great amount of rework that will affect the quality of the product to the customer, on-time delivery. It could create issues from a product safety perspective of endangering the public, of you know, maybe I did not put the right types of materials in there. So that's the kind of thing you're looking for. That was like a good engineering example. Talking to the factory floor, it can be, you know, hey, if I don't do something with regards to conformity or safety, it could have a negative effect down the line. Could we create out-of-station work, creating FOD, creating inefficiencies, holding up production, resulting in nonconformities to customers, late service, unhappy customer, which is now always a bad thing with regards to you know, taking their business somewhere else. So that's the kind of things we would expect to see in here when we talk to employees. Now, I didn't talk about ethical behavior. I have gotten questions about the fact, do I need to go have an ethics line or an ethics office? Not necessarily. I would recommend that you know, you look at the culture of the organization, and this is really, even though ethical behavior is this first time we use those words, it's always kind of been assumed, right? You know, we've always had requirements where people stamp off operations, and we expect them to have ethical behavior to, I'm only going to stamp off things I actually did. Also, to make sure that, you know, managers are listening to employees, taking actions on employees' concerns. We expect employees to report, not pass on defects, not think that, oh, you know, Bob will catch it, you know, down the line, that's his job, or hey, Jay, the next guy who gets the part in assembly, if it doesn't fit, he'll let me know. No, if it's not meeting requirements, we will make sure that we take action, we raise our hand, making sure that, you know, when we have ethical issues within our organization, it can be very damaging to our image, both within the industry, to our customers, and can even be criminal activities, breaking laws, regulations, and so forth. You know, one of the things I would suggest is, if your organization, you know, sometimes people use chain of command, and that's fine unless the problem is in the chain of command. So there should be some independent way your organization has to go raise issues. Documented information. Once again, I already mentioned about there's no requirement for the 6 mandatory procedures, and the extent of documentation will depend upon the business context. We did put a requirement. Once again, we included all the requirements within the quality manual, including things like interested parties, QMS scope, process description, sequence interactions, responsibilities, authorities, quality policy, and objectives. And we did add the requirement back in to have documented information regarding nonconformity and corrective action. Obviously, you now have some flexibility for documented information, ways you can go show this. That's been the great aspect of this new revision, because before you used to have documented procedures for everything. Well, guess what? There's better ways to go do this these days. You can have process flow diagrams. You can have a chart on the wall with the flow that says here's how to go do it with instructions. You can have embedded videos. Lots of different ways you can go do these things. You can have you know, workflow software that actually puts controls in so the work flows in the correct sequence. Retain document information, aka records, making sure that it's not only when the standard requires it, but also you need to have evidence that your quality management system is being carried out as planned. So clauses 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all part of the planning of plan, do, check, act structure of the standard itself. Section 8 is operation, formerly known as product realization, product life cycle. So it is the doing aspect. I know in automotive this is talked about as far as customer-oriented processes, COPS. Starts off with operational planning and control. One of the things you'll notice is that we do not have a title of a clause called project management and work transfers. The shall statements are still embedded within 8.1, but we got rid of those titles. Project management specifically was misunderstood, so we wanted to make sure that people understood the intent of the requirement and not thinking that it applied to facilities, Kaizen type improvement projects. So that was not the intent. Also in 8.1, reinforce some of the planning and controls activities, focused more on quality, on-time delivery. We've always done a pretty good job of quality, but not necessarily on time. And there's tremendous impacts of the business when products from the supply chain is not delivered on time. Prevent the delivery of non-conforming products and services. We're still seeing a lot of escapes. Escapes are very detrimental to the assembly process, especially when it goes straight dock to stock. And also ensuring involvement of all representative small functions. What we're sometimes seeing is people trying to streamline things and saying, oh yeah, we'll just let, you know, this organization kind of make the decision. Well, that might save you some time up front, but long term, it can have detrimental consequences. Also in 8.1, we have a note, right? Notes are for guidance. Remember, we talk about integrated phase processes as a method to achieve operational planning and control. Some of you who are APQP, PPAP experts will say, hey, that sounds to me like APQP, PPAP, and that's what it is. Once again, it's a note, so it's not a requirement that you implement APQP, PPAP, but if you have a system or want to go implement a system, it meets many of the requirements here in 8.1. Also, with that being said, I'll also plug the AS9100D, which was recently released on APQP and PPAP. 8.1, Operation Risk Management. We introduced risk management in 2009 with regards to how it applies to the whole product life cycle. What's interesting is that risk in the contracts realm has existed since the very first writing of 9100. So we've always been kind of pioneers when it's come to risk and risk management. We'll talk a little bit more about this. I have a backup chart. Configuration management, very important to our industry. There was some confusion in the past where it was located under Section 4. So we moved it here to Section 8 since it deals with the product and the configuration of that product. It was confusing to some that you know, what we did is we highly referenced ISO 10007, which is kind of the configuration management professional vocabulary and standard that they use. The problem is that some organizations, especially small organizations, didn't quite understand what some of those terms meant. So what we did is we clarified the requirements to be a little bit more straightforward with regards to what configuration management includes. 8.13, product safety. Added requirements to address product safety. This is the next logical evolution. Remember, we added requirements for critical items during the last revision. We talk about product safety here. We also, we also talk about where we have critical applications, testing the material as well. So if you think about these things as part of a system, it starts to make sense. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future chart. And then preservation of counterfeit parts. Obviously critical for all industries, but especially our industry where we have, products that fly, products that carry our warfighters and the flying public. How do we make sure that we prevent counterfeit or suspect counterfeit parts? So a little bit more about risk management. I already talked about Clause 6.1, talking about overall risk-based thinking and how it applies to the whole quality management system. And then embedded within there, we have this Clause 811 that talks about operation risk management, where we have more of a formalized process for risk management, and we're required to take actions and have risk plans and so forth. Very little has changed with regards to risk management from 2009. There are some additional information in Annex A4 on both what ISO 9001 has as well as 9100 additions to that. Product safety, always been critical for our industry, right? Making sure that our safety is considered throughout the whole product life cycle. It's here in Clause 813, but also referenced in several other clauses within the standard. What we want to do is ICAO is requiring safety management systems for many areas of our business and our sector. ICAO being the International Civil Aviation Organization. They're the organizations that like flow requirements like the FAA. Where a full safety management system is not required by 9100, we felt that some of the basic concepts of safety management systems were appropriate. So we have put those in there, but we also realized that it would not be applicable necessarily to every single organization. So we have several as appropriate and as applicables in there. Once again, the rationale is about the importance of increasing safety, both a key, very important to both authorities as well as the overall IAQG strategy. So the definition of product safety, the state in which a product is able to perform to its designated or intended purpose without causing unacceptable risk of harm to persons or damage to property. So how would you go about looking at product safety? First is go assess the hazards you have and mitigation of associated risk within your organization. There's lots of different ways to go do that. Obviously, if your customer is flowing down to you critical items, that is a no-brainer that here's something you should go look at from a product safety perspective. And the way you'd go do that is to make sure that whatever controls are established on those critical items are being performed. How do you manage your safety critical items? What are those additional controls you put in place for working those? How do you analyze and report any occurred events with regard to safety? Collecting, analyzing the information, and then making sure you communicate those to your personnel, including training of how to avoid those in the future. Let's learn from our mistakes. Counterfeit parts, another new clause. What's interesting is that there was counterfeit part provisions within 9110, 9120 in the past. Now 9100 is adding them as well. There's several times there's references. The rationale is to mitigate the growing threat of counterfeit fraudulent parts and recognizing the emergence of some statutory, regulatory, as well as additional standards being published on counterfeit parts. The definition is an unauthorized copy, imitation, substitute, or modified part which is knowingly misrepresented as specified genuine part of an original or authorized manufacturer. You notice nowhere in there did you see this is limited to EEE parts or electronic parts. It's up to the organization to go make an assessment to determine where they have a risk of counterfeit parts. Things to consider, obviously training. We want to make sure that we have procurement personnel who get rewarded for finding cheap products to understand that there's such a thing as counterfeit parts. We don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. We need to only buy from trusted sources. We need to make sure our inspection personnel realize the threat of counterfeit parts. That way to make sure they're kind of our first line in-house of defense, and how to go do testing to go verify that it is. Design personnel, to make sure that they're aware of obsolescence management. That is now a requirement within design and development. So I know there's a great desire to use COTS products for some of our product activities within our industry. The problem with that is sometimes those COTS items can go obsolete and then you have a hard time finding them. Controls for acquiring parts. We're going to get parts from original manufacturers, authorized distributors, or approved sources. We'll make sure the parts have traceability, good lineage from OEMs or authorized manufacturers. We want to make sure we have verification and test processes in place to detect counterfeit parts. When we identify counterfeit parts, we also want to have some kind of a reporting. I know here in the United States, in the defense community, we do a lot of guide-up alerts with counterfeit parts. You might want to look at your contract, your PO, to see if they have counterfeit parts reporting requirements. Also, we want to make sure that if we identify some counterfeit parts, we put safeguards in place so that it just doesn't get returned back to the supplier. While it's suspect, we're holding it until we make a determination of whether it is actual counterfeit parts or not, and then make sure that doesn't re-enter the supply chain. 8.2, requirements for products and services, a little bit of a different structure where customer communication is up front, including contingency actions. 8.2.2, talking about determining the requirements for products and services. What are all those requirements that we get from our customers? Let's go collect those. There is a requirement that's been added for ISO that before you go submit a bid to go do a job, that you can meet the claims of the order for products and services that the customer is dictating. So I collect these requirements and then I make a review of those to make sure that we can meet those. That review needs to be coordinated with applicable functions of the organization. And if we're not going to meet some of those customer requirements, we need to make sure we have a way of communicating that back to the customer. And then if there's any changes to those requirements, those are documented, controlled, and shared. 8.3, design and development, a little bit of different order, right? I think in 2009 it went planning, inputs, outputs, design reviews, verification, validation, and then changes. So this is a little bit more of a process flow where it starts with planning, inputs, controls, which includes design reviews, verification, validation, and then the outputs. So much more focused on a process. The planning gives some additional flexibility with regards to stages and controls. If you have a very simplistic engineering project, there'll obviously be fewer stages and controls than if I have a very complex product. Also, the document information needed for demonstration of compliance to requirements, making sure you have those appropriate records. The inputs, as I mentioned, you can consider product obsolescence to try to cut down on the amount of counterfeit parts, because I have a hard time finding them because the parts are obsolete. The controls, like I said, it includes reviews, verification, validation. What's important is that this reflects reality, and we're using calibrated devices to make sure that the testing is properly controlled. With that being said, we want to make sure that we're mimicking a production environment and those controls of a production environment. The outputs of design development will be authorized prior to release, and that if there's any changes of a process, we're going to notify our customer. 8.4, we used to call this purchasing. Now it's control of externally provided processes, products, and services. What they did is they kind of combined the outsource and purchasing processes into this clause 8.4, so that's great. Many times organizations have product conformity issues, and it's not so much of missteps by their direct supply chain, but sometimes it can be missteps from your supplier's suppliers, your second tier. So what we did is we put some explicit requirements to consider appropriate controls for direct and sub-tier suppliers to ensure the consistency of the whole supply chain. The type of extent of control, we added some things back in. One is that we were getting feedback that many OEMs are finding that some of their supply base, they're requiring test reports to accompany the parts when they get sent in. But then what happens is they're not verifying those test reports. Sometimes those test reports are not even for the products that are in the order. So there's requirement to confirm the results to comply with those requirements. Also, if you have raw materials that are significant operational risk, it requires you to validate the process of test reports for accuracy. So in the past we had this requirement, but it wasn't, the word significant operational risk was not there. So people were misunderstanding the requirement. We took this out in 2009 because we felt that the risk management and critical items took care of the requirement. But we received quite an outpouring asking us to put it back in. The intent is that, I had some people ask me, my auditor's making me check every single raw material on an annual basis and having an independent check. It's expensive. And that was not the intent. The intent is that where you have risk, especially with critical items, that's the material you want to go test. So if I have an aluminum titanium alloy that I'm going to make the wing attach fittings of, otherwise they're going to crack and the wing's going to fall off, I want to go test it to make sure that it is the right material. Also for 843, information for external providers, this is like our purchase orders that you have. We restructured that listing a little bit so it's a little bit easier to understand, and there's communication requirements to the external providers. Talk a little bit more about evaluation of data on test reports. So first thing you do is the organization is to determine when test reports are required, and then check those results as being compliant before accepting the parts. With regards to validation process of test reports, accuracy for raw materials, what raw materials do I have where there's a critical aspect that if it fails, there's going to be a product safety issues. Define the process to be applied, and then apply the process and take any necessary actions. So the next section, section 8.5, production and service provision. Yep. The first one talks about making sure we have appropriate controls. You'll notice as I'm going through this, you won't see monitoring and measurement of product. Some of those controls and requirements are here in 751. Also, there's a fourth level indenture. There's a 7511 control of program tools and software programs, and 8512, validation and control of special processes. What ISO did is they took 752 for special processes and made that just a single bullet within 8.5.1. We felt that that was, we have a lot of concerns with regard to aviation, space, and defense on special processes, so we added it back into 9100. And then 8513, production process verification. So then we have identification, traceability, not really too many changes there. Property belonging to customers or external providers. So before it was just kind of more focused on the customer. Now if we have property belonging to external providers, how do we control that? 854, preservation, how do we make sure we're maintaining the equipment? 855, post-delivery activities. This is a new ISO clause. We had this clause in 9100. It was at a 4th level indenture, was at 7514. And now that ISO has put a section here, we moved those requirements under post-delivery activities. One of the things we talked about as a 9100 team is, and it's currently 7514B, is when problems are detected after delivery, you'll take appropriate action. We talked about maybe moving that to some other clause, but at the end of the day, we believe that it best fit these post-delivery activities. So because of that, very few organizations will be able to have this be not applicable within their system, just like 7514 is today. 856, control of changes. More emphasis on the change process here within production and service provision. 86, release of products and services. A new clause, but definitely not new activity. Before you release products and services to the customer, how do you verify that all activities have been carried out before that? Control of non-conforming outputs. It includes services, and also remember we have a procedure requirement for how we do control of non-conforming outputs and corrective actions. So we did our plan, clauses 4 through 7. Our do, or section 8. Now it's time for check, which is section 9, performance evaluation, monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. Talks to general customer satisfaction, analysis, and evaluation. Analysis of data in the past was not an area where there was a lot of words or a lot of requirements. There were not very many findings in that area. So 913, analysis and evaluation, really has been bolstered where there's more specific requirements, and there's also a requirement that that analysis go into management review, so the outputs are more clear. It's amazing to me how few findings there are in the 2009 version of clause 8.3. I don't think that's indicative, because we all believe that all organizations just do an outstanding job of analyzing the data. 9.2, internal audit, pretty much the same. One of the things, there's been some notes added within 9100 to say that you should be looking at the effectiveness of the process, in addition to make sure that if you're not looking at process measures as a measure of process effectiveness, you need to start doing that. Management review, there are numerous changes, including purchasing process, on-time delivery, quality, also on-time delivery performance. There's an output now required for identification of risk, so make sure you go over 9.3 with a fine-tooth comb. So we did the plan, we did the do, we did the check, now it's time for the act. Section 10, improvement, non-conformity corrective action. This is where we talk about human factors from a standpoint of If your cause tells you that it's a human error or workmanship, don't stop there. Why was there a workmanship issue? Why was there a human error issue? Also, we added back in the requirement for a procedure for nonconformity and corrective action. 10.3, continual improvement. Very few changes there. Annex, clarification of the new structure, terminology, concepts. Annex A really does a very nice job of introducing a lot of new concepts, and then B and C have that list in that table of other standards that either TC 176 or IAQG has that could be beneficial. It's a little bit more about human factors. Human factors considered for the causal analysis and your analysis of nonconformities. Make sure you have the understanding of how interactions occur between people, machines, each other, and their impact on human performance. I mentioned that human factors could also be considered with regards to work environment 714, as well as 851G, Pokeyoke, mistake proofing. If there's any opportunity to mistake proof your processes, you do that. Some implementation considerations is making sure human factors is considered according to your products, workplaces, equipment, people. Include the elements to be reviewed and capitalize on lessons learned. So if you wanted to see this all in a single chart, this is what it would look like with regards to the black text being the ISO 9001, the blue italics, the 9100. Implementation benefits, of course, still the requirement and the benefit of producing, continually improving, safe, reliable products that meet or exceed customer regulatory requirements. It should be how you operate day to day. If it's not how you operate day to day, you've not done a very good job of implementation. What this stuff should be is all value added, where the benefits outweigh the cost. And if you're doing something very difficult, of course the standard tells you what to do, you get to determine how you do it, then you've not implemented it correctly. Improved integration with the business operations and strategy, that the documentation reflects the work performed, that you're looking at all your interested parties, including supply chain stakeholders. IAQG is continuing to try to identify areas to generate commonality so we don't have customer-specific documents and have the document continue to be recognized by regulatory authorities. Transition dates, I already mentioned about September 2015, ISO was released. September 2016, 9100 was released. October 2016, 9101, 9110, 9120 was published. November, many of you organizations who probably don't care too much about the aerospace auditor transition training, but it was available starting in November. But the next sentence I want to bring your attention to, we have released a system called Oasis Next Generation. Phase 1 is complete. Your CBs are using this today. If you haven't logged into Oasis recently, we would recommend you go do it. The new system is more user-friendly than the old Oasis is, even though Oasis Next Generation is operating very much like the legacy system. Where you're going to see major changes is when you see the 2016 versions of 9100. Today what happens typically is we're communicating via email. In the future we'll communicate via Oasis. Your auditor will be typing the audit reports, the 9101s, directly into Oasis, or copy and pasting it into Oasis. When they are complete, that document will be routed to you for review and approval. Upon your concurrence and marking off or hitting a little button, it will then go to the certification body. The same thing is to be true for non-conforming management. Non-conformances will be sent to you via Oasis. Then you'll be responding to those corrective actions in Oasis as well. So the Oasis will be the tool we'll be using in the future to communicate. September 2018, that's when transition will be complete, and the 2009 versions of the standards will no longer be valid. In order to meet that date, we need to back up a little more than 12 months. So June 2017, all future audits will be done to 9100 series, the 2016 version, including using the 9101 audit process. So this doesn't matter whether you have a surveillance audit, recertification audit, any audit. The date is actually June 15th, will be the new standard. Deployment support material, all these slides, you see there number 1, go to deployment support material on the left side of iaqg.org. Or another simpler way to go do it is there's yellow boxes on the top right. If you want to go directly to 9100, just hit that box. If you want to go just to where the screen is on the right, you can either hit deployment support materials or IAQG standards questions. And this is what you'll find. Quite a bit of information, 3 different levels of presentations, one being the executive presentation, key changes, and this presentation, clause by clause. We've had some webinar recordings of the key changes and the clause by clause, so you can share that with others. Correlation matrices, the 2009 requirements, where to find it in 2016, and vice versa. Here's the 2016, and here's how they align to the 2009. We have that both in a Word side-by-side as well as an Excel matrix. Frequently asked questions. Here's an article on how to go transition. Gap assessment worksheet. What we did is we put together an Excel spreadsheet that you can use for your gap assessments if you so choose. And what it has is that's the first column is here's the 2016, here's how it aligns with the 2009, and then we also bring to your attention the significant changes between the two. And then there's some other columns for how you're going to manage your implementation. 9100 evaluation guidance material. That is kind of what to look for, what to ask. It is not fully populated yet, but what we have populated out there we want to have available to the users. So that is out there. Okay? So if you have any questions, I would encourage you to write them to Perry Johnson, and they will respond to your questions. If you have something for me, you can do that either through the IAQG Oasis feedback, or have my contact information out there on the IAQG website. So I hope you found this webinar helpful. The intent of this webinar was to try to provide kind of a high-level understanding of some of the differences clause by clause, and I wish you much success in your transition activity. Thank you. You have a great day.